I am Raven. I am 26 years old. I have served long enough to know how to stand still when everything inside you wants to react. November 2024, Fort Liberty, North Carolina. The old Fort Bragg with a new name and the same weight in the air. The medal ceremony was held on the parade field just after sunrise. Cold, clean air, flags barely moving. Rows of chairs aligned with the kind of precision you only notice when it is done right. I stood in formation, wearing my dress uniform pressed sharp enough to cut. My boots were polished until the morning light reflected back at me. My name was on the program, but my role was not. That was intentional. I was there because I had been ordered to be there. Nothing more, nothing less. Families filled the back rows. Parents, spouses, children sitting too still. Cameras held at chest height, smiles rehearsed. This was supposed to be a moment of recognition, a moment of closure. I had not seen my father in months. When I felt his presence, it was not because he touched me. It was because the air changed. Richard Hale, a senior officer, a man who carried authority like it was his birthright. He stood behind the seating area with his arms folded. His eyes found me instantly. They always did. Even as a child, I could feel that look before I heard his voice. He had come in uniform, medals heavy on his chest, rank visible from a distance. People noticed him. They always did. A few nodded respectfully. A few whispered. I kept my eyes forward. That was how I survived him growing up. Do not react. Do not give him the satisfaction. The ceremony began with the anthem. The flag rose slowly. I felt the familiar tightening in my chest that comes when memory and duty collide. Names were called, medals pinned, applause measured and respectful. When my name was announced, I stepped forward exactly as trained. 3 paces. Halt. Salute. The officer presenting the medal smiled politely. Cameras clicked. The crowd leaned in. That was when my father decided to speak. Not loudly. He never needed to shout. His voice carried because people expected it to. He stepped closer from the side and laughed once. A short, dismissive sound. Then he said it. Clear, sharp, public. A pig in a dress uniform. The words landed like a physical blow. I felt them before I processed them. A ripple moved through the crowd. Gasps swallowed halfway. Someone coughed. The officer froze with the medal still in his hand. For a fraction of a second, everything stopped. I did not move. I did not turn. I did not react. Years of conditioning held me upright. Inside, something cracked. Not loudly, cleanly, like ice breaking under pressure. I could feel heat rise behind my eyes and then flatten into something colder. I heard my father's breath, as if he expected a response, a flinch, a tear, an apology. He had always believed humiliation was a tool, that if he broke me publicly, I would fall back into place privately. I kept my chin level, my hands steady. Silence stretched. It became uncomfortable, heavy. The officer lowered his hands solely, unsure of what to do. Cameras hesitated. This was not on the program. I could feel every eye on me now, waiting, judging, measuring. Then a voice cut through the space, calm, commanding, unmistakable. Black Widow, step forward now. The effect was immediate. The crowd did not understand the words, but they understood the tone. Authority does not need explanation. It needs recognition. My father stiffened. I saw it from the corner of my eye. Not confusion, recognition. Fear. He knew that voice. Everyone in uniform did. I stepped forward one pace, not because I wanted to, because I was ordered to. The officer presenting the medal stepped back instinctively. The command continued. "Raven, remain at attention." I did. The air felt electric now, charged. Something had shifted and everyone felt it, even if they did not know why. My father opened his mouth, then closed it. He took a step back without realizing he was doing it. That was the first time in my life I had seen him yield space. I stood there, breathing slow, controlled. My heart was loud in my ears, but my body was still. I thought of every time he had told me I was too much, too heavy, too embarrassing. I thought of every mirror he had turned into an enemy. I thought of every silence I had survived. The voice spoke again. "Black Widow, hold position." There was no explanation, no justification, just instruction. Cameras started recording again, unsure but unwilling to miss what felt like the beginning of something irreversible. I did not look at my father. I did not need to. The humiliation he had intended for me was no longer mine alone. It had changed direction. The officer cleared his throat and waited. The crowd leaned forward, breath held. The medal ceremony had become something else, a moment none of them would forget. If you have ever been humiliated by someone who thought they owned you, stay with me. The cold that morning felt sharper, cleaner, like the edge of a blade. I stood there, knowing that whatever happened next would not be loud. It would not be messy. But it would be final. I grew up inside a house that looked perfect from the outside. Trim lawn, flags on holidays, shoes lined by the door. A military family. That was the phrase people used when they spoke about us with admiration. From 2010 to 2017, my life followed a rhythm that never belonged to me. My father, Richard Hale, believed discipline was love and control was protection. He ran our home the way he ran a unit, schedules taped to the refrigerator, silence at the dinner table unless spoken to, correction delivered without emotion, mistakes remembered forever. I learned early that his approval was conditional and temporary. One wrong step erased months of obedience. My mother stayed quiet. She moved through the house carefully, like someone trained not to disturb a sleeping animal. When he spoke, she listened. When he decided, she agreed. There were no arguments, only orders delivered in a calm voice that made resistance feel childish. He did not hit. He did not shout. He did something worse. He labeled. Every failure became a definition. Every insecurity became a weakness to be cataloged and reused. When I gained weight during puberty, he commented on it publicly. Not cruelly, casually, like an observation in a report. "You need to watch that. People notice." When I wore clothes I liked, he corrected me. "That is not how a Hale presents herself." When I spoke too much, he cut me off. When I stayed quiet, he called me dull. There was no correct posture, only mistakes. At family gatherings, he compared me to other children. "Do you see how composed she is? Do you see how disciplined he is?" Then he would look at me and sigh. Always the sigh. Heavy, disappointed. Like I had failed a standard I had never been told. At school I did well, but never well enough to impress him. An A- was a question. Why not an A? An A was dismissed. That is expected. Nothing earned praise because praise implied satisfaction, and satisfaction meant loss of control. He called me a burden more than once, usually after I asked for something simple. New shoes, school supplies, time. "You cost more than you bring in. You should be grateful. Gratitude became my default emotion. Gratitude and fear. Fear of doing something wrong. Fear of being seen. Fear of taking up space. I learned to shrink, to make myself smaller so he would not notice me. But he always did. He noticed everything: my posture, my tone, my body, my silence. He told me I embarrassed him, not because I misbehaved, but because I existed imperfectly. When relatives visited, he warned me ahead of time. Do not talk too much. Do not eat too much. Do not draw attention. When I followed those instructions, he found something else. Why are you hiding? Stand up straight. People think you are ashamed. I was. Not of myself at first, but of his disappointment. Over time, that changed. I began to suspect something was wrong with the system, not me. That suspicion scared me. Questioning him felt like betrayal, like treason. In our house, loyalty was obedience. There was no space for doubt. Yet doubt grew quietly. At night, I would lie awake and imagine a version of myself somewhere else. Somewhere I was measured by effort, not compliance. Somewhere rules were written down and applied evenly. Somewhere silence was not demanded as proof of respect. I did not have language for what I felt, but I knew I wanted out. The idea of leaving terrified me because he had trained me to believe I could not survive without his structure, that the world was harsher than he was, that without his control, I would fail completely. He repeated that message often. You are not ready. You cannot handle pressure. You need guidance. Guidance meant him. Always him. By 17, the house felt smaller. The walls closed in. His voice followed me even when he was not in the room. I corrected myself before he could. I monitored my eating, my posture, my words. I became my own warden. The breaking point did not come from one incident. It came from accumulation. From years of being told I was a problem to be managed, a liability, a disappointment. The word shame was used more than once. You bring shame to this family. Shame became the lens through which I saw myself. And then, one night, he said something that shifted everything. We were sitting at the table, another quiet dinner. He looked at me and said, "You will never make it on your own. You do not have the discipline. You do not have the strength." That was said calmly, confidently, like a fact. Something in me stopped trying at that moment. Not in defeat, but in clarity. If I stayed, I would disappear completely. I was 18 when I made the decision. I did not announce it. I did not ask permission. I filled out the paperwork quietly. The military was not an act of rebellion. It was an escape route, a structure I chose instead of one imposed on me, a system where rules were written and rank was earned. I did not join to prove him wrong. I joined to find out who I was without his voice in my head. The day I left the house, he did not hug me. He shook my hand, like a transaction, like I was a problem being transferred elsewhere. I remember thinking as I walked away that fear still lived in me, but it no longer owned me. Doubt remained, but it was no longer paralyzing. I was not free yet, but I was moving. And for the first time in my life, movement felt like hope. I arrived at Fort Jackson in the summer of 2018 with a single duffel bag and a silence inside me that felt heavier than the South Carolina heat. Basic training stripped away everything familiar. Hair cut short, civilian clothes gone, name replaced by last name and rank. For most people, the shock was overwhelming. For me, it was grounding. The rules were clear. The expectations were written. No one cared who my father was. No one cared where I came from. They cared about whether I could follow instructions and keep moving when I was tired. I learned quickly that discipline here was different from discipline at home. At Fort Jackson, discipline was not used to humiliate. It was used to create consistency. When I failed a task, I was corrected and shown how to improve. When I succeeded, it was noted without commentary. That neutrality felt like mercy. I worked hard not to stand out, and even harder not to fall behind. Physical training pushed my limits, but it was the mental pressure that tested me most. Long days, short nights, constant evaluation. I felt something unfamiliar take shape beneath the fatigue. Confidence. Not loud, not performative. Quiet and internal. Halfway through training, I learned that my father had found a way to involve himself again. A drill instructor pulled me aside after formation and asked if I was related to a senior officer named Hale. I answered yes. That was all. The question lingered longer than it should have. After that, my file seemed to attract attention. Extra reviews, additional questions. Nothing overt, nothing that could be challenged. Just pressure applied carefully. I understood immediately what was happening. My father was reminding the system that I belonged to him. I did not confront it. I did not react. I did what I had always done. I worked harder. I volunteered for extra duties. I studied regulations until they became instinct. I learned to anticipate problems before they surfaced. When others complained, I observed. When others reacted, I calculated. That habit kept me steady. Instructors began to notice, not because I spoke, but because I did not panic. During evaluations, I remained calm. When plans changed, I adjusted. When others froze, I moved. I learned that composure was a form of strength the system valued deeply. By 2019, I had advanced through training and into specialized instruction. Still, nothing glamorous, no headlines, no celebration, just consistent performance. My father attempted contact more than once. Messages framed as concern, advice disguised as warnings. Be careful. Do not embarrass the family. Remember who you are. I did not respond. Silence was not defiance. It was insulation. I understood that anything I said would be used to reassert control. So I said nothing. In late 2019, a selection process began quietly. No announcements, no promises, just observation. I was asked to complete assessments that tested pattern recognition and decision-making under pressure. The questions were not about strength. They were about judgment. I did not know what they were for, and I did not ask. Asking invited scrutiny. I passed without celebration. In early 2020, I was informed I had been chosen for additional screening. The wording was careful. Opportunity pending clearance. No details provided, no guarantees. I signed paperwork without discussion. I was instructed not to inform anyone, including family. That condition mattered more than the selection itself. For the first time, secrecy worked in my favor. My father knew nothing. He could not interfere with what he could not see. Training continued. The world outside shifted as well. News cycles filled with uncertainty. Schedules changed. Pressure increased. I stayed focused. Hope crept in quietly. Not the naive hope of approval, but the grounded hope of self-direction. Yet caution remained. I had learned that progress often triggered retaliation. Every step forward carried risk. I did not allow myself to imagine outcomes. I focused on process. Show up, perform, document nothing unnecessarily, Speak only when required. By the end of 2020, I had completed everything asked of me. My evaluations reflected consistency and restraint. Words like disciplined, analytical, steady appeared more than once. Those words mattered. They described me without reference to my father. No one in my family knew what I had been selected for or why my schedule changed. They assumed I was drifting, unremarkable. That assumption protected me. As I looked ahead, I felt hope sharpened by vigilance. I was building something quietly, and I knew better than to announce it. The system was watching. My father was not. And for the first time, that imbalance worked in my favor. The years 2021 to 2022 marked a shift that felt subtle at first, and then undeniable. I had settled into my assignments with steady evaluations and limited visibility. That balance did not last. My father noticed the distance. Silence had always been my shield, but to him it read as defiance. He began applying pressure the only way he knew how, through relationships and implication. It started with phone calls that sounded concerned but carried warning. He mentioned names casually, commanders he knew, offices he could reach. He reminded me that careers were fragile and reputations even more so. I listened without responding. Soon the concern hardened into threat. He spoke about administrative reports like they were weather events he could summon. He talked about stalled promotions as consequences for disloyalty. Nothing explicit, nothing written, just enough to make the message clear. When I returned home on leave, the atmosphere had changed. Conversations stopped when I entered a room. Relatives watched me with a mixture of pity and judgment. The story circulating was simple and convenient. Raven had gone nowhere. Raven had failed to shine. Raven was wasting potential. My father reinforced that narrative with practiced disappointment. He never said I was doing well. He never asked about my work. He spoke as if my service was a detour rather than a path. He compared me to others who had advanced faster. He questioned my choices publicly. Why are you still at that level? Why have we not heard anything impressive? Each question landed like a verdict. I realized then that success would never be acknowledged because acknowledgement would weaken his control. The pressure intensified. I received notice of additional reviews that did not align with my performance. Questions about minor discrepancies that required documentation and time. I recognized the pattern immediately. This was how influence operated when it wanted to remain deniable. I did not confront him. I did not appeal emotionally. I did something new. I started documenting everything. Dates, calls, names, changes to my schedule, requests that appeared without cause. I kept copies of evaluations and messages. I learned the language of policy and procedure until it became fluent. This was not paranoia. It was preparation. At family gatherings, I became a topic rather than a participant. They spoke about me as if I were not present. She is lost. She does not know what she wants. She could have had more if she listened. I watched my mother avoid my eyes. I watched my father enjoy the authority of consensus. Isolation settled in quietly. I was not excluded directly. I was dismissed. Invitations stopped. Updates were withheld. I existed on the margins of my own family. That isolation hurt more than the threats. It confirmed what I had long suspected. My value to them was conditional and transactional. When I stopped reinforcing my father's image, I became expendable. Professionally, the pressure remained, indirect but persistent. Delays appeared, approvals took longer, opportunities dissolved without explanation. I responded by staying precise. I submitted flawless paperwork. I followed protocol exactly. I did not give them leverage. The effort required was exhausting, but clarifying. I was no longer trying to earn acceptance. I was protecting my trajectory. The emotional shift was slow and irreversible. Disillusionment replaced hope, not bitterness, clarity. I stopped believing my father would change or that my family would intervene. They benefited too much from the hierarchy he enforced. I accepted that truth without drama. That acceptance freed me. I no longer wasted energy on defense. I focused on resilience. Documentation became routine. I kept my records secure and separate. I did not share them. I did not hint at them. I let the system continue unaware that I was paying attention. By late 2022, the escalation reached a plateau. The threats remained but did not intensify. My father believed he had me contained. He spoke with confidence about my stalled future. He called me a disappointment openly. He framed my silence as evidence of weakness. I did not correct him. I did not need to. Inside, something steady had formed. Awareness. I understood the rules of the environment and my position within it. I was not powerless. I was patient. The family saw a failure. The system saw a quiet performer. And I saw the difference clearly for the first time. The illusion was gone. What remained was resolve, sharpened by evidence and restraint. In early 2023, my assignment changed without announcement or ceremony. There was no congratulatory briefing and no visible transfer orders. I was called into a small office with no insignia on the door and asked a series of questions that had nothing to do with physical performance. They asked how I handled ambiguity, how I documented decisions, how I responded when authority conflicted with policy. The questions were precise and unemotional. I answered the same way: calm, factual, measured. A week later, I received a notice marked restricted that redirected my duties. The language was careful: liaison responsibilities, oversight support, internal review assistance. There was no mention of combat or field operations. This was not a role that rewarded aggression. It required patience and accuracy. I was told the work would involve compliance and accountability across units, that I would observe processes, verify records, identify gaps between written policy and actual practice. My access increased quietly. Systems that had once been opaque opened without comment. I was given credentials that allowed me to see patterns most people never noticed. The work was demanding in a different way. There were no visible markers of success, no medals, no praise. Only files that closed cleanly and questions that no longer needed asking. I understood immediately why the role required discretion. Influence revealed itself through documentation, not confrontation. During onboarding, I signed a non-disclosure agreement that was absolute. The terms were clear. I could not discuss my duties with anyone outside a narrow chain. Not friends, not family, not even colleagues without need to know. Breach meant removal and consequence. I signed without hesitation. Silence had always been my skill set. The first time I saw the call sign, it was buried in a header: Black Widow. It was not spoken. It was not explained. It existed only as an identifier within the system. I did not react. Names held power only if you displayed them. This one was meant to remain unseen. The work itself was meticulous. I reviewed administrative actions, tracked approvals, compared timelines. I learned how authority could be misused without breaking a single written rule. Delays framed as process, denials framed as oversight. I learned how pressure traveled downward and how protection traveled upward. My job was not to accuse, it was to verify, to ensure the record reflected reality. That responsibility carried weight. I felt tension settle into my shoulders during the first months. The knowledge I carried could not be shared. I listened to conversations knowing what lay beneath them. I attended meetings where decisions were justified publicly and contradicted privately by the data. I did not intervene. That was not my role. My role was to observe and prepare the ground for accountability. Autonomy followed competence. The more precise my work became, the more trust I was given. Access expanded. My calendar shifted. I was present in rooms where my father once moved with confidence. He did not know. That invisibility mattered. Outside the assignment, my life remained unchanged. To my family, I appeared stalled, unremarkable. My father continued to speak about my lack of progress. He dismissed my service as a placeholder. I let him. Inside the role, I learned restraint. There were moments when the implications of what I documented made my pulse quicken. Evidence of pressure applied where it did not belong. Records altered subtly to protect reputations. None of it dramatic, all of it consequential. I recorded without emotion. I cited policy. I archived correspondence. Tension became focus. Focus became control. By mid-year, the work no longer felt foreign. It felt precise. I understood how accountability moved when left undisturbed, how the system corrected itself when given clean information. I also understood why the role demanded isolation. The truth carried by documentation could not be diluted by opinion. I maintained strict separation between my duties and my personal life. My father noticed the distance and interpreted it as weakness. He was wrong. I was learning how power actually functioned, not through rank or volume, but through consistency and record. The call sign appeared again in a briefing packet, still silent, still confined to paper. It did not belong to me in conversation. It belonged to the work. By the end of 2023, I felt something settle that I had never known before. Agency. Not loud, not defiant. Earned. The tension did not disappear. It transformed into discipline. I understood my boundaries and respected them. I understood the risks and accepted them. I moved carefully and deliberately. I had not been given a weapon. I had been given responsibility, and I was ready to carry it. In early 2024, the patterns I had been documenting quietly began to converge